The world wasn't ending in fire and brimstone. It was ending in silence. A profound, terrifying digital silence, punctuated only by the frantic thumping of my own heart and the hum of a server fan spinning its little heart out for absolutely no reason. "Come on," I muttered, my voice a raw whisper in the chilled air of my basement command center. "Come on, you delicate little glass bastard, seat properly." My fingers, usually so deft on a keyboard or a network switch, felt like clumsy sausages. I was trying to guide a fiber optic strand, a filament of glass thinner than a human hair, into the microscopic maw of a media converter. Sweat dripped from my forehead onto the concrete floor, each drop a tiny explosion in the quiet tomb my high-tech life had become. On one monitor, a wall of red, unreachable errors glared at me, a digital monument to my failure. On another, a single, looping security camera feed showed the source of my personal apocalypse, a neatly severed black cable lying on my perfectly manicured lawn like a dead snake. This wasn't just my internet. This was everything. My job, my connection to the outside world, my raid night in World of Warcraft, and, as I had discovered in a wave of cold nausea just 90 seconds ago, the primary data link for the county's 911 dispatch center. No pressure. I had a plan. It was a stupid plan, a plan that violated at least 17 different ISP regulations and possibly the Geneva Conventions. It involved a 100-meter spool of shielded copper cable currently making a mockery of my lawn, 2 industrial media converters that I'd definitely borrowed from a decommissioned project at work, and a power over Ethernet injector that was about to do something its designers never intended. I was performing unlicensed, open-heart surgery on the internet, with the digital equivalent of a rusty pocket knife and a bottle of whiskey. The tiny fiber clicked into place. "Okay," I breathed, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Phase 1. This whole mess, this descent into high-stakes, caffeine-fueled madness had started not with a bang, but with a scowl. Just 3 hours earlier, it had been a perfectly normal Tuesday, which, in the suburbs, is immediately suspicious. Normalcy is just a curtain, and you never know what's twitching behind it. I was in my basement office, my sanctuary, my bat cave. 3 monitors formed a gentle curve in front of me. A 4th wall-mounted one displayed a rotating set of network dashboards and security camera feeds. The air was a cool 68 degrees Fahrenheit, maintained by its own dedicated AC unit, and smelled faintly of ozone and freshly brewed coffee. This was my fortress of solitude, the place where I, Alex, senior network architect for one of those tech giants you've definitely heard of, built the invisible scaffolds that hold up the modern world. On the main screen was a video conference grid of 12 faces, all of them VPs or senior directors, all of them looking serious. We were discussing a multi-million-dollar server migration from Oregon to Ohio. And so the synergistic paradigm shift will leverage our dynamic cloud infrastructure to create a more robust B2B outcome, said a man named Bill, whose entire job, as far as I could tell, was to arrange words like synergy and paradigm into new and ever more meaningless combinations. He was a master of corporate jargon, a man who could speak for 20 minutes without transmitting a single byte of actual information. My job was to make sure that when they flipped the switch on this synergistic paradigm shift, it didn't set half the company's data on fire. I was the plumber staring at a blueprint for a crystal palace, knowing that no matter how pretty it looked, it all came down to whether the pipes leaked. I took a sip of my coffee and glanced at the security camera monitor. And there she was, Carol. Carol was the self-appointed final boss of the Creekwood Estates Homeowners Association, a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and eyes that could spot a non-compliant trash can from 100 yards. She patrolled the sidewalks with a clipboard and a palpable sense of righteous fury. In the 2 years I'd lived here, she had waged holy war against my neighbor's excessively cheerful garden gnome, sent me a passive-aggressive notice about my mailbox being 1.5 inches too low, and attempted to legislate the precise shade of beige all garage doors had to be painted. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from my wife, Sarah. "She's on the prowl again. Did you bring the trash cans in?" I typed back a quick reply. "Yes, dear. The perimeter is secure. Threat level, beige." Sarah loved it. She found my ongoing Cold War with the HOA endlessly amusing. She was the diplomat, the one who would smile and wave and diffuse situations with cheerful normalcy. I was the grumpy troll in the basement, muttering about bylaws and property lines. On the camera feed, I watched Carol stop at the edge of my property. She was staring down at a small, unassuming green box sticking out of the ground. A fiber pedestal. It was a standard piece of utility hardware, installed long before we moved in. It serviced our house and a few others, but more importantly, it was a junction point for a much larger trunk line. To a normal person, it was practically invisible. To Carol, it was a festering wound on the pristine flesh of her community. She scowled at it, poked it with her shoe, and then scribbled something on her clipboard. I rolled my eyes. What's she going to do? Fine me for the color of the grass around it? I turned my attention back to the meeting. Bill had finally finished his verbal tapestry of nonsense, and it was my turn. "Okay, Alex, give us the technical breakdown," my boss said. "Walk us through the latency projections." "Right," I said, clearing my throat and sharing my screen. I brought up a complex network diagram, a beautiful web of lines and nodes. So, as you can see from the latency projections between the West and Midwest data centers, it was at that exact moment that I saw her on the camera feed again. She had returned. And this time she had a massive pair of garden shears, the kind you use to cut tree branches. A flicker of disbelief ran through me. She's not going to try and prune the utility box, is she? That's not even a plant. The thought was so absurd, so utterly insane, that I dismissed it immediately. Even for Carol, that was a bridge too far. I focused back on my presentation. The primary issue will be mitigating packet loss during the initial failover. I've architected a redundant path that should keep downtime to less than... And then the world ended. My screen froze. The 12 faces of the VPs dissolved into a smear of pixels. The audio cut out, replaced by an oppressive silence. On the top of my monitor, a small, cheerful, and utterly devastating yellow icon appeared. No internet connection. For a full 5 seconds, I just stared at it, my brain refusing to process the information. It was like a fish realizing it was no longer in water. Then came the 5 stages of IT grief, a process I knew intimately. Stage 1, denial. "Nah, it's just a blip," I said to the empty room. "A cosmic ray hit the modem." I got up and walked over to the rack of networking gear humming quietly in the corner. All the lights on the modem and router were blinking green, the universal sign for "everything's fine, boss," which is the biggest lie in modern technology. Still, I dutifully unplugged the modem, counted to 15 like a religious ritual, and plugged it back in. Nothing. Stage 2, anger. A hot flush of rage washed over me. I cursed Megaband ISP, my service provider. I cursed the modem manufacturer. I cursed the concept of Tuesdays. I slammed my hand on my desk, rattling my coffee mug. "You piece of junk!" The server rack hummed back at me, indifferent. Stage Annie, bargaining. "Okay, computer gods, I whispered, looking up at the ceiling. Lords of latency, patrons of packets. If you just come back online, I swear I'll finally update the firmware on the smart thermostat. I'll even stop making fun of Bill's use of the word synergy. Just, please. Stage 4. Depression. The bargaining failed. The silence in the room felt heavier now. I slumped into my chair, the adrenaline of the meeting draining away, replaced by a cold dread. It was over. My career, my reputation, my carefully constructed world of digital order, all gone. My raid leader in World of Warcraft was going to be so pissed. My priorities were, perhaps, slightly skewed in that moment. Stage 5. Acceptance, investigation. A new feeling started to bubble up through the despair. Professional curiosity. A problem without a solution is a disaster. A problem with a cause is a puzzle. Okay, I said, pushing myself up. Let's go find the body. I pulled out my phone. The Wi-Fi symbol was gone, of course. I tried to switch to my cellular data. 1 bar. The network was clearly overwhelmed. A quick check of the Creekwood Estates Facebook group confirmed my fears. It was on fire. Karen B. posted, "Internet out for anyone else in the north section. My son can't watch his cartoons and he's about to go feral." Tom P. replied, "My whole smart home is dead. The lights are stuck on magenta and the TV is playing the Home Depot theme song on a loop. Send help." Chad G. added, "Megaband is a joke. I pay $120 a month for this?" It was widespread, a major outage. And then, a cold, icy spike of dread shot through my heart as I remembered the security camera feed. Carol, the scowl, the clipboard, the shears. No, she wouldn't. She couldn't. I flew up the stairs from the basement, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I threw open the back door and stepped out into the blindingly normal Tuesday afternoon. The air was filled with the confused murmur of my neighbors, who were emerging from their homes like startled meerkats, blinking in the sunlight, holding their dead phones aloft as if seeking a signal from the heavens. I didn't need to seek. I knew where to look. I walked to the edge of my lawn, my steps heavy with impending doom. And there it was, the crime scene. Lying on the perfectly green grass was the source of the neighborhood's collective digital agony. The thick, black, armored fiber optic cable had been snipped clean in two. It wasn't frayed or broken. It was a clean, precise cut. The kind of cut a large pair of bypass shears would make. Its delicate, glassy innards, the very medium that carried our memes, our work emails, and our Netflix binges, were splayed out and exposed to the air. And standing there, not 5 feet away, was the architect of this chaos. Carol. She was wiping her shears with a pristine white cloth, a smug, self-satisfied look on her face, like a gardener who had just vanquished a particularly stubborn weed. The sun glinted off the steel blades of her weapon of mass disruption. I just stared, my mind struggling to form a coherent sentence. It was the sheer, unmitigated audacity that broke me. She wasn't fleeing the scene. She was admiring her work. "Carol," I finally managed, my voice tight. "What did you do?" She looked up, her expression one of mild annoyance, as if I were interrupting her moment of triumph. "I did what had to be done, Alex," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "That unsightly box and its nasty black cable have been a blight on this community for months, a clear violation of the bylaws." "The bylaws?" I croaked, incredulous. "Section 8, Article 4, she recited, as if quoting scripture. "No unauthorized external wiring or apparatus shall be visible from the street. It's quite clear." I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Carol, that's the main fiber trunk for the entire neighborhood. That's not unauthorized wiring. It's critical infrastructure. You just disconnected hundreds of homes." She waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that infuriated me more than the act itself. Nonsense. The cable was only on the edge of your property. Besides, it was an eyesore. If the internet company wants to provide a service, they can do it properly. Run it underground where it belongs. I did them a favor, really. Forced their hand. I stood there, speechless. I was trying to process the galaxy brain level of ignorance required to arrive at that conclusion. It was like watching someone remove a load-bearing wall from a house and then complain about the creaking noises. I tried to explain the concept of a trunk line, how it was a digital artery for the whole area, but her eyes glazed over. She wasn't listening. She was basking in the warm glow of her own perceived righteousness. You need to be more mindful of the community aesthetic, Alex, she finished, giving me a pitying look. Property values don't maintain themselves. She then turned, tucked her shears into a pouch on her little garden cart, and began to wheel it away, leaving me standing over the corpse of our collective connectivity. I was alone with the silence, the severed cable, and the smoldering ruins of my sanity. I stormed back into the house, slamming the door behind me. The quiet of my command center was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. My brain, however, was already shifting gears from pure rage to professional crisis mode. Trunk line. She cut a trunk line. That meant the outage wasn't just a few houses on my street. A trunk line is like a highway. Our individual connections are the little side roads. She hadn't just put up a roadblock on my driveway. She'd dynamited an overpass on I-95. I needed to know where that highway led. My main connection was down, but my work laptop still had cached files from my last network sync. I frantically searched for the local topology maps I'd downloaded months ago out of sheer professional curiosity. I was the kind of nerd who liked to know how my own neighborhood was wired. It was like a birdwatcher knowing the migration patterns in their backyard. There it was. A PDF file labeled Creekwood_grid_7B_topology. I opened it. A web of lines and nodes filled the screen. I found our street, our little cul-de-sac. I located the green pedestal at the edge of my property, designated junction_P1138. I traced the thick line leading out of it. It snaked past the Creekwood Estates development, ran parallel to the main road, and then took a hard right. It fed into a larger bundle that terminated at a single, large building about 3 miles away. The County Annex building. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. I knew that building. It wasn't just administrative offices. It housed 2 critically important operations: the Sheriff's Office Data Hub and the Regional 911 Emergency Dispatch Center. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the edge of my desk. Of course they had backups. They'd have redundant lines from other providers, satellite uplinks, carrier pigeons for all I knew. But those systems aren't magic. Failover isn't instantaneous. When a primary line is hard cut like that, not just losing signal but severed, it can cause catastrophic packet loss and system confusion before the backups fully engage. For a few seconds, or maybe a few minutes, every police car, every fire truck, every ambulance in a 100-square-mile radius could be flying blind. Location data from cell phones could fail to transmit. Incoming calls could be dropped into a digital abyss. The entire central nervous system of the county's emergency response had just been taken out with a pair of gardening shears because a woman thought it was an eyesore. This was no longer about my job or my neighbor's Netflix. This had just escalated from a major inconvenience to a public safety emergency, a potential felony. I looked at the clock on my screen. It had been about 5 minutes since the connection died. How long does a failover take? 30 seconds? A minute? 2 minutes? Every second that passed was another second the system was vulnerable. I couldn't call anyone. The cell network was choked. Even if I could get through to 911, what would I say? "Hi, my neighbor just committed an act of accidental cyber terrorism. Please hold. I had to fix it, right now." And looking around my basement, at the racks of gear, the spools of cable, the boxes of forgotten projects, I realized I was probably the only person in a 5-mile radius who actually could. My basement wasn't just an office. It was a laboratory of organized chaos. Over the years, I'd accumulated a dragon's hoard of technological artifacts, old servers, spare parts, and enough cabling to rewire the Pentagon. I couldn't splice fiber optic cable that required a fusion splicer and the steady hands of a surgeon, but I could build a bridge. A messy, ugly, highly unorthodox bridge. The plan formed in my mind with the terrifying clarity of a truly desperate idea. I had a pair of industrial-grade media converters designed to turn a fiber optic signal into a standard Ethernet signal. I had a 100-meter spool of shielded, direct burial copper Ethernet cable I'd bought for a backyard Wi-Fi project I never started, and I had a high-wattage power over Ethernet (PoE) injector that could send electricity down that copper cable. The plan? Connect one media converter to the live side of the fiber cut, feeding it power from my house. Run the 100 meters of copper cable across my lawn like a massive, ugly tripwire. Connect the second media converter to the other end of the copper and then plug it into the dead side of the fiber cut, powering it via PoE down the Ethernet cable. It was the digital equivalent of using a garden hose to patch a burst water main. It would be slow, it would have terrible latency, but it might just work. I moved with a speed I didn't know I possessed. I grabbed the converters, the spool of cable, a toolkit with fiber cleaning supplies, and a massive pre-filled thermos of coffee. Adrenaline is good, but caffeine is better. I burst into the garage. Sarah was there, just getting out of her car. She took one look at the wild look in my eyes and the armful of gear. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice a mixture of alarm and amusement. "I'm performing unlicensed, emergency open-heart surgery on the internet," I panted. "Don't tell anyone." "Should I call a lawyer?" "Maybe," I shouted back, already halfway out the door. "But call him on a landline." I ran to the severed cable. My neighbors, still milling about in confused clusters, stared as I began unspooling the thick, black Ethernet cable across my lawn. I could feel their judgment, their whispers. There goes crazy Alex from number 42 again. I didn't care. The first converter was the easy part. I carefully prepped the fiber strand from the live side, the side coming from the street, and plugged it into the converter. I ran an extension cord from my garage and powered it on. A little green light blinked to life. Good. The hard part was the other side. This converter would be sitting in the middle of the lawn with no power source. This was where the PoE injector came in. Back in my basement, I plugged the injector into my main network switch and ran the other end of the big copper cable to it. Now, theoretically, power was flowing down that cable. Back outside, I connected the copper cable to the second converter. Then, with trembling hands, I prepped the second fiber strand, the one leading towards the rest of the neighborhood and the 911 center, and plugged it in. I held my breath. A series of lights on the second converter blinked amber, then red, then amber again. It was thinking. It was trying to negotiate a connection through my monstrous, unholy creation. "Come on," I begged the little plastic box. "Talk to each other. Be friends." The lights hesitated. For a heart-stopping second, they all went dark. Failure. And then one by one, they flickered to life. Green, solid green, power, link, activity. It was working. The bridge was complete. I didn't wait to celebrate. I sprinted back to my basement, vaulting the stairs 2 at a time. I crashed into my office chair, eyes locked on the monitor. The wall of red, unreachable errors was still there. Then, one of them flickered and turned green. Then another, and another. Like a forest fire running in reverse, the wave of green swept across the screen until the wall was solid green. Pings were being returned. Packets were flowing. My email client chimed, a glorious, beautiful sound, as a flood of delayed messages poured in. I ran a speed test. It was awful. The latency was through the roof. I was getting maybe 20 megabits per second out of a gigabit line. But it was alive. I looked at the clock on my screen. I cross-referenced it with the timestamp of the first network down alert. Total time from my realization of the 911 problem to the moment of reconnection, 2 minutes and 14 seconds. I slumped back in my chair, covered in dirt, grass stains, and sweat. My lawn looked like an abstract art installation. My neighbors probably thought I'd finally snapped. But the connection was back. I picked up my coffee thermos, which I'd somehow managed to bring back with me, and took a long, shaky gulp. Okay, I thought, the caffeine and adrenaline warring for control of my nervous system. Now the trouble really starts. It took about an hour for the first official vehicle to arrive. A white van with the faded Megaband ISP logo on the side pulled up to the curb. A man in a blue uniform got out, a clipboard in one hand, and a weary expression on his face. He looked like he'd spent his morning dealing with people who thought their modem wasn't working because the internet light was the wrong shade of green. His name tag read Dave. Dave was about to have a very different kind of day. He walked up my driveway, his eyes on the job ticket on his clipboard. "Afternoon," he said, not looking up. "Got a report of an outage at this address?" "Something like that," I said, gesturing towards the lawn. "The problem is over there." Dave looked up from his clipboard. His eyes followed my gesture. He saw the severed fiber optic cable first. He sighed, a sound of profound professional resignation. "All right, looks like a line cut, probably a landscaping crew." He started walking towards it. Then he stopped. His brain had finally processed the second part of the equation. The thick, black copper cable snaking across my lawn and terminating in a bizarre junction of electronics. He stopped dead in his tracks. His mouth fell slightly open. He looked at my jury-rigged setup. He looked at the severed fiber. He looked at me, standing on my porch like a proud, deranged father. He looked back at the setup. "What?" he said, his voice a perfect blend of awe and horror. "In the name of all that is holy. Is that?" "That," I announced with a flourish of my coffee mug, "is a tactical, short-term Layer 1 bypass, a field-expedient network bridge. You're welcome." Dave walked closer, circling the media converters like a bomb disposal expert, examining a strange new device. He didn't touch anything. He just stared. Is that a direct burial Cat 6 running to a pair of TrendNet media converters with a PoE feed for the remote unit?" I felt a surge of pride. He spoke my language. "You know your hardware." "Dude," he said, finally looking me in the eye. His own were wide with a kind of terrified respect. "I've seen people try to fix a line cut with Scotch tape. I saw a guy try to use a paperclip once. I have never, ever seen anything like this. Does it actually work?" "I'm getting about 20 megs with a 200 millisecond ping," I said. "It's ugly, but it's passing packets." That's when I decided to drop the other shoe. "You should probably know," I added, my voice dropping. "This isn't just the feed for the neighborhood. This is the primary trunk for the county annex." Dave's face went pale. The 911 center? The one and only. His exhaustion was instantly replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He fumbled for his diagnostic tool, a ruggedized tablet, and plugged it into my contraption. He stared at the screen, watching the data flow. "It's online," he whispered, as if witnessing a miracle. "The link is active." He looked at me, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. "You probably saved lives, man. For real." He paused. Then a slow grin spread across his face. "Also, my supervisor is going to have a full-blown aneurysm-level stroke when he hears about this." He pulled out his phone. "I have to call this in. This is way, way above my pay grade." I listened as he talked to his boss. It was a masterclass in downplaying a catastrophe. "Yeah, supervisor, it's Dave? Yeah, the Creekwood outage. So, you're not going to believe this. The trunk was severed. Yeah, a clean cut. No, not landscaping. Look, just send the fiber splicing crew. And maybe call legal? And you might want to sit down." He hung up the phone and looked at me. "They're on their way. The big guns." He shook his head, a look of grudging admiration on his face. "So, who did it? Who cut the line?" "Her," I said, pointing with my thumb towards Carol's house. She was standing on her porch, arms crossed, watching us like a hawk. "With garden shears. She said it was an eyesore." Dave stared at Carol, then back at me. He let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Of course," he said. A new bond of cynical camaraderie forged between us. "Of course it was an HOA Karen. It's always a Karen." We didn't have to wait long. Less than 30 minutes after Dave's call, a police cruiser rolled slowly down the street and parked behind the megaband van. A single officer got out, adjusting his belt. His movements were slow, deliberate. He had the air of a man who had seen every possible permutation of petty suburban drama and was profoundly unimpressed by all of them. His name tag read Miller. He ambled towards us, his eyes scanning the scene. The ISP van, me, Dave, the tech, the insane cable running across my lawn, and Carol watching from her porch. His expression was one of infinite weariness. He was clearly expecting a he said, she said dispute about a property line. "Folks," Officer Miller said, his voice flat. "Getting some calls about a disturbance. What's the issue here?" I opened my mouth to speak, but Miller held up a hand. He was looking at my lawn cable. "Sir, I don't know what's going on here, but I can tell you right now that's a code violation." Before I could unleash the sarcastic reply that was bubbling on my lips, Dave stepped forward. He had shifted from cynical tech to concerned citizen. "Officer, with all due respect, this is a bit more than a code violation dispute," Dave said, his tone serious. He pointed at the severed fiber optic cable. "That's the megaband fiber trunk for this entire grid. A woman over there," he gestured to Carol's house, "cut it with shears about 2 hours ago." Miller's expression didn't change. He looked at the cable, then back at Dave. "Okay, vandalism, destruction of property, we can take a report." "It's more than that," I chimed in, deciding to go for the jugular. "That line is the primary data feed for the county annex building on Route 9. Miller just stared at me. I could see the wheels turning in his head. "Route 9? County annex?" Dave delivered the final blow. "The 911 dispatch center, officer. For at least 2 minutes, maybe more, their entire system was dark because she thought the cable was an eyesore. That did it. The change in Officer Miller's demeanor was instantaneous and dramatic. The boredom evaporated, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. The slouch was gone, his posture straightened. His eyes, which had been glazed over with apathy, were now sharp and analytical. He looked at my jury-rigged solution with new understanding. He looked at the severed cable. Then, he looked over at Carol's house, his gaze lingering. "Stay here," he said, his voice now a low, serious command. He turned on his heel, walked briskly back to his cruiser, and got on the radio. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but the tone was urgent. The nature of his day, and Carol's, had just changed irrevocably. This wasn't a neighborhood squabble anymore. This was a real police matter. Officer Miller spent a good 15 minutes on his radio before he finally got out of his car. He walked, not to us, but directly to Carol's front porch. Dave and I stood by my driveway, trying to look casual, but we were watching every move. Carol, seeing the officer approach her directly, seemed to puff up with self-importance. This was her moment. She was the concerned citizen reporting the neighborhood eccentric. The conversation started calmly, but soon her hands started moving. She gesticulated wildly, pointing at my house, at my lawn, at me. Her voice, sharp and indignant, carried across the manicured lawns. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught the highlights. Unauthorized construction. Always been trouble since he moved in. Felt threatened, very aggressive. That ugly black cable he put down, he's the one violating the rules. I was merely cleaning up a hazardous area. She was a maestro of victimhood, weaving a narrative of a brave community guardian fending off a dangerous rogue. Dave just shook his head slowly, a look of grim recognition on his face. "She's good," he muttered. "She's really, really good." After what felt like an eternity, Officer Miller concluded his interview with her and walked back over to us. His face was an unreadable mask of police neutrality. "Okay," he began, pulling out a notepad. "So her story is that the utility box was a known hazard, and she has complained about it before. She claims the cable was old and brittle, and it broke while she was performing routine landscaping." "With shears," I blurted out. "Did she say it broke with shears?" Miller shot me a look. "She claims she was trimming the grass around it and it simply gave way. Furthermore, she alleges that you then installed this illegal wire across your lawn and are now trying to frame her to cover up your own unauthorized work." I was dumbfounded. The sheer, unmitigated gall. It was a masterstroke of deflection and projection. I was no longer the hero who saved the 911 center. I was the villain who was trying to frame a sweet old lady who just loved gardening. "Are you kidding me?" I sputtered. "Ask him." I pointed at Dave. "He's the expert. Look at the cut on the cable. It's as clean as a surgical incision. Tell him to check her garden shed for the shears." "Calm down, sir," Miller said, holding up a hand. His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Right now I have two conflicting stories. We have to investigate both sides. I've got your statements. A detective will be in touch with all parties involved." He paused, looking at me. "For now, don't leave town. And I'd advise you to leave, whatever that is, in place until the ISP technicians have completed their repairs." He gave a final, long look at my beautiful, monstrous creation, then tipped his hat to Dave and walked back to his car. He drove off, leaving me and Dave standing in the middle of the quiet street, a profound sense of injustice hanging in the air. I, the reluctant hero of Creekwood Estates, was now officially a suspect. The moment Officer Miller's cruiser turned the corner, the world decided to catch up with me all at once. My phone, which had been mercifully quiet, began to buzz with the intensity of an angry hornet. The first call was from Sarah. Her voice had lost its earlier amusement. "Alex, a detective? Seriously? I leave for a 2-hour grocery run and you've somehow managed to become part of a major police investigation. Do we need a lawyer?" "Let's wait and see," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Right now I'm somewhere between a local hero and a federal criminal. It's a bit of a toss-up." I had just hung up when the phone rang again. It was my boss, Mike. My heart sank. I was about to get reamed for using tens of thousands of dollars of company hardware for a personal project. Alex! Mike's voice boomed through the phone, far too cheerful for the situation. What have you been up to, you magnificent bastard? Maintaining a synergistic work-from-home environment? I ventured. Don't give me that, he laughed. I just got off the phone with the VP of Engineering, who got a call from our CEO, who got a call from the Director of County Emergency Services. The story is all over the internal corporate network. They're calling you the Network Knight. Apparently, you single-handedly saved the 911 system with some spare parts and a roll of Cat 6. You made us look like goddamn heroes. I was stunned. So, I'm not in trouble for the media converters? Trouble? We're expensing them. Legal is already drafting a press release about our commitment to community infrastructure and our proactive, civic-minded employees. Whatever you need, Alex, you've got it. The company is behind you 100%. It was the most surreal conversation of my life. I had become an accidental corporate poster boy for vigilantism. The phone rang a third time. This time it was a blocked number. Is this Alex? A woman's voice asked. It was sharp, professional. Speaking. This is Catherine Dunleavy from the legal department at Megaband ISP. I'm calling to thank you for your unconventional intervention this morning. Our engineers are in awe. Glad I could help, I said. We are pressing full criminal charges against the individual responsible for the destruction of our property, she continued, her voice turning to ice. The preliminary damage estimate is over $50,000 for the emergency crew rollout and the cost to rerun and fusion splice the trunk line. We will also be pursuing a civil suit for damages. We'd like to get a formal recorded statement from you as our primary witness. Of course, I said, my head spinning. 50 grand. For one snip of her shears. And then, as if on cue, the fourth and final horseman of my afternoon apocalypse called. Mr. Last name. The voice was calm, measured, and held an unmistakable air of authority. This is Detective Rodriguez with the County Sheriff's Office. I've taken over the investigation from Officer Miller regarding the incident on your property. Her tone was all business. This wasn't local cop dealing with a spat anymore. This was the real deal. As I'm sure you're aware, she continued, the infrastructure that was damaged is designated as critical to emergency services. Tampering with it is a state-level felony, and we may be coordinating with our federal partners. I need to come by tomorrow morning to take a formal statement and to have our people inspect your remedial work. Please don't touch anything until then. Felony, federal partners. The words echoed in my ears. This had spiraled so far beyond a dispute over an eyesore that it was now in a different orbit. Carol hadn't just poked the bear, she'd drop-kicked it in the face. And I was standing right in the middle of the ensuing chaos. The story continues in the next response due to character limits. ### Chapter 10. The Contractor and the King. The next morning, the real cavalry arrived. Not a single van, but a convoy. A big Megaband bucket truck, a sleek fiber-optic splicing operations van, and a supervisor's pickup truck. A team of 4 serious-looking technicians in crisp uniforms swarmed the area, cordoning off the crime scene with yellow tape. They moved with a quiet, efficient professionalism that made Dave's one-man show look like amateur hour. Leading them was a man who looked like he'd been born in a server room. He was in his 50s, with a grizzled beard, a deep tan, and hands that looked like they could troubleshoot a network switch by touch alone. His name tag read Marcus, Senior Field Engineer. He was the guy they sent when things went spectacularly wrong. He walked right past his own crew and came straight to me, where I stood on my porch nursing a coffee. Detective Rodriguez had told me to be available, and I was taking that order very seriously. Marcus stopped at the edge of my lawn, his eyes fixed on my copper bridge. He didn't say a word for a full minute. He just looked. He walked the length of the cable, his gaze taking in every detail. The way I'd secured the converters, the type of cable I'd used, the insane extension cord powering the near side unit. He knelt down and examined the little plastic box, passing data for the whole county, his expression unreadable. I braced myself for a lecture, a dressing down about protocol, safety, and the sanctity of his network. Finally, he stood up, dusted off his knees, and turned to me. "It's ugly as sin," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It's a flagrant violation of about 17 different federal and state regulations. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen." He paused, a slow smile creeping across his face. "And it's the most brilliant field patch I've ever seen in 30 years in this business. I wouldn't have thought of it." A wave of relief and vindication washed over me. This was praise from Caesar. This was the master craftsman admiring the apprentice's gutsy, insane solution. We were getting alerts from the 911 dispatch center before they even knew their own system was down. Marcus continued, shaking his head in disbelief. Our network operations center saw the link drop, and then 134 seconds later, saw it come back up, but weird. The connection was garbage, but it was there. They couldn't figure out what was happening. They thought all their monitoring tools were broken. Then Dave's call came in. He gestured for me to join him by the yellow tape. His crew parted respectfully as I approached. They all looked at me with a kind of nerdy awe. I had become a folk hero to the cable guys. "My guys are about to set up the splicing tent and run a new segment of fiber," Marcus explained. "But to do that, we have to take your bridge down, which means the link will go dark again for about an hour. Detective Rodriguez is here." He nodded towards an unmarked car parked down the street. "And she's already coordinated the downtime with the dispatch center. They're on full satellite backup." He looked at me. "I just wanted to shake the hand of the guy who pulled it off." He stuck out a calloused hand, and I shook it. For a moment, I wasn't just Alex, the sarcastic WFH nerd. I was a fellow professional, a brother in arms in the endless war against network outages. I had been accepted into the tribe. While the megaband crew worked their high-tech magic, the neighborhood itself was fracturing. The Creekwood Estates Facebook page, my primary source for suburban intelligence, had devolved into a digital civil war. The battle lines were drawn. On one side was Team Carroll. It was a small but vocal contingent of HOA loyalists and people who genuinely believed a tidy lawn was more important than a functioning emergency service. Brenda L. posted, "Carol is just trying to uphold our community standards, which is what we elected her to do. That green box was an eyesore, and I, for one, am glad it's gone." Gary P. added, "This Alex guy sounds like trouble. Who has all that equipment in his basement anyway? Seems suspicious if you ask me. He probably cut it himself for the attention." On the other side was the much larger and much angrier Team Alex. This was composed of everyone who ran a home business, had kids who needed the internet for school, or possessed a basic understanding of cause and effect. Samantha R. wrote, "An eyesore? My husband had a medical emergency yesterday morning, and the paramedics said their system was glitchy, and it took them 10 extra minutes to get here. This is unacceptable." Mark T., who ran an accounting firm from his home office, was livid. "I lost half a day of productivity and couldn't file my client's quarterly taxes because of this. I'm sending the HOA the bill for my lost income." The thread was a glorious, horrifying mess of accusations, memes, and poorly spelled insults. I was simultaneously the community's savior and its villain. Later that afternoon, as I was taking out my now perfectly compliant recycling bin, my neighbor Bob shuffled over from his yard. Bob was in his 70s, a retired history teacher who served as the neighborhood's unofficial oracle. He had seen it all. "Afternoon, Alex," he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially as he leaned on his rake. "Quite the kerfuffle you've kicked up." "I didn't kick it up, Bob," I sighed. "I just tried to patch the hole." "Heard about your run-in with Calamity Carol?" he chuckled. The name was perfect. "Not her first rodeo, you know. Back in '09, we had the Great Mailbox War. She tried to get the whole street to replace their mailboxes because the new postal trucks were a slightly different height. Cost people hundreds. Then there was the petunia purge of 14, when she declared red petunias aesthetically aggressive and went around pulling them out of people's gardens at night. I stared at him. You're kidding? Wish I was, Bob said, shaking his head. She's a legend. But this time she went too far. Cutting off the 911 service? Even her staunchest supporters are getting quiet. He leaned in closer. Speaking of which, you should talk to Margaret Gable, over in the Blue House. He pointed with his chin. Quiet lady, keeps to herself. But she installed one of them fancy 4K security camera systems last month after someone stole a package. Her front camera is pointed right at your lawn, right at that little green box. My heart skipped a beat. A witness. A silent, digital, irrefutable witness. Thanks, Bob, I said, a genuine sense of gratitude welling up. That's really good to know. We look after our own, Bob said with a wink. And right now you're the guy with the free internet, so you're definitely one of our own. 2 days later, an official notice was taped to every door in Creekwood Estates. Emergency HOA meeting, attendance mandatory. The subject was listed as Recent Infrastructure Incident and Review of Bylaw Enforcement Procedures. The community clubhouse was a small, stuffy room that usually smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. Tonight, it was packed. It was standing room only, the air thick with tension, cheap drip coffee, and the scent of suburban justice. The entire neighborhood was there, a sea of hostile, curious, and anxious faces. The HOA board, 3 nervous-looking men who usually just rubber-stamped Carol's decrees, sat at a folding table at the front, looking like they were facing a firing squad. The meeting started with the HOA president, a man named Stan, nervously reading a prepared statement about community safety and cooperation. Then, he made his mistake. He opened the floor for comments. Carol stood up immediately. She had dressed for the occasion in a beige pantsuit, looking every bit the wronged matriarch. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue and began a tearful, self-aggrandizing speech about her decades of thankless service, her love for the community, and her tireless efforts to protect our collective property values. She painted me as the villain, a hostile tech recluse who had installed dangerous, illegal equipment on my lawn and was now leading a smear campaign to defame her. I was only trying to protect our beautiful neighborhood from unsightly blight, she concluded, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. Can anyone fault me for that? The room was silent. Her allies looked uncomfortable. Her enemies were simmering. Then Stan, the president, looked at me. Alex, do you have a response? Sarah, who was sitting next to me, gave my hand a squeeze. Calm and factual, she whispered. Not a sarcastic jackass. I took a deep breath and stood up. The entire room turned to look at me. I'm not going to talk about aesthetics or property values, I began, my voice steady. I'm going to talk about facts. Fact 1. The cable Carol cut provided internet and phone service to every single house in this room. A murmur went through the crowd. Fact 2. That same cable was the primary data link for our county's 911 dispatch center. When she cut it, she disconnected them from their network. The murmur grew louder. People started looking at each other, their expressions shifting from curiosity to alarm. Fact 3. My illegal equipment, I said, making air quotes, was a temporary bridge that got that 911 center back online in under 3 minutes. I have statements from Megaband ISP and the county sheriff's office to confirm that. I let that sink in. Then, for the final blow, I looked at Stan. I don't think the question is whether Carol can be faulted. I think the question is, why does our HOA have a bylaw enforcement policy that allows one person, with no technical knowledge whatsoever, to damage critical public safety infrastructure? The room erupted. But before the chaos could take over, a hand went up in the back. It was Dave, the megaband tech. He had come on his own time, wearing his uniform. "Stan, if I may," he said. Stan nodded meekly. "My name is Dave. I'm a field tech with Megaband," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Just so everyone is clear on the financial side of this bylaw enforcement, the cost to repair the damage Miss Carol's last name caused is estimated at over $50,000. Our legal department will be seeking to recover those costs from the responsible party. Or, if it's determined she was acting as an agent of the HOA, from the HOA itself." A collective gasp went through the room. $50,000. That was a special assessment that would hit every homeowner. The support for Carol vanished in an instant, replaced by horrified, angry glares. Then Bob, the oracle, stood up. "And for the record," he said, his old teacher voice full of authority, "Mrs. Gable's security camera across the street caught the whole thing on video. In beautiful 4K, I hear. That was it, the final nail in Carol's coffin." The meeting descended into chaos. The HOA president, looking terrified of the angry mob, grabbed his gavel and banged it on the table. "Order! Order! The board officially denounces the actions taken. Carol is suspended from all HOA duties and committees, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the legal investigation." Carol just stood there, her face white with shock, as her entire world, built on a foundation of beige paint and petty tyranny, crumbled around her. The next afternoon was quiet and sunny. The megaband convoy was gone, leaving behind a small, fresh patch of dirt on my lawn, where the new pedestal was presumably buried. My internet was faster than ever. It felt like the storm had passed. Then I saw it. Detective Rodriguez's unmarked sedan pulling up, not to my house but directly in front of Carol's. I watched from my office window, a cup of coffee in hand, like I was watching the finale of a long-running drama series. Rodriguez got out of her car, along with another plainclothes officer. They walked up Carol's pristine walkway and knocked on the door. Carol answered, looking haggard. The confident, righteous warrior from the HOA meeting was gone, replaced by a tired, scared-looking woman. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could imagine the conversation, playing it out in my head based on Rodriguez's no-nonsense demeanor. "Rodriguez. Ma'am, we have the severed cable from your neighbor's lawn. Forensics confirms it was cut with shears." Rodriguez. "We have testimony from the internet provider, multiple neighbors, and the Director of Emergency Services about the outage you caused." Rodriguez. "And most importantly, ma'am, we have a warrant for this." I imagined her holding up a tablet. "This is a crystal-clear 4K video from your neighbor's security camera. It shows you, at 10:17 a.m. 2 days ago, approaching the utility box and cutting the cable." I saw Carol's shoulders slump. There was no argument, no blustering, just the quiet, heavy weight of irrefutable proof. The moment of truth wasn't a dramatic shout or a tearful breakdown. It was the quiet finality of Detective Rodriguez turning Carol around gently and placing her hands behind her back. It was the soft, metallic click of the handcuffs. Carol was escorted in stunned silence to the waiting car. She didn't look at my house. She just stared straight ahead, her face a mask of disbelief. As the car pulled away, I didn't feel a surge of triumph or satisfaction. I just felt a profound sense of exhaustion and a quiet, definitive relief. The reign of Calamity Carol was officially over. Life in Creekwood Estates began to return to normal. but it was a new, slightly more interesting normal. I had gone from the weird guy in the basement to a bona fide local celebrity. My 15 minutes of fame were low-key, but deeply satisfying. A few days after the arrest, a massive edible arrangement arrived at my door. It was an architectural marvel of chocolate-dipped strawberries and pineapple flowers. The card, signed by the entire night shift of the County 911 Dispatch Center, read, "Thanks for the speedy backup. You're our hero. P.S. We used your story as a training example for unforeseen infrastructure failure." A week later, a thick, formal envelope arrived from Megaband ISP. Inside was a framed letter of commendation, praising my quick thinking and technical ingenuity. There was also a check for $5,000 for emergency consulting services. And most gloriously, a certificate stating that my address was to receive complimentary gigabit internet service for life. I framed the certificate and hung it in my office, right next to my college diploma. It felt more significant. My story even made the local paper, buried on page B4 of the Sunday edition. Local man's quick thinking averts 911 disaster. They used a terrible photo of me squinting on my porch, but Sarah cut it out and put it on the fridge anyway. I was sitting on the back deck with her one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was peaceful. "So," she said, nudging my shoulder, "are you going to get a cape now? Start fighting crime as the amazing network man?" I laughed, taking a sip of my beer. "Absolutely not. My only superpower is a crippling intolerance for buffering." I paused, thinking about it. And maybe a deep-seated need to prove smug people wrong. "Well, the neighborhood is safer for it," she said, resting her head on my shoulder. "And we have free internet for life. That's a pretty good outcome." "Yeah," I said, looking out over my perfectly boring, quiet, and well-connected suburban kingdom. It was all worth it. 3 months later. It's a quiet Saturday morning. The fresh patch of dirt on my lawn has long since been covered by new grass, indistinguishable from the rest. In its place, however, is something new. Not a small, unassuming green box. This one is a fortress. It's a larger, reinforced steel pedestal, bolted to a concrete base. It's surrounded by a small, sturdy iron fence, the kind that says, "Don't even think about it." And on its front is a large, clear, laminated sign. Warning: critical 911 and data infrastructure. Do not tamper. Property of Megaband ISP. Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of state and federal law. U.S. Code, Title 18, Section 1362. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen on my lawn. The HOA had new leadership. Stan, the former president, had stepped down in disgrace. The new board was a group of reasonable people who were far more concerned with pool maintenance than the color of petunias. The reign of aesthetic terror was over. I'm sipping my coffee on the porch, my laptop open next to me, the Wi-Fi signal full and strong. In the distance, I see a work crew in bright orange vests, picking up trash along the main road. It's the county's community service team, and among them, dutifully spearing a stray fast food bag, is Carol. She's thinner. Her hair isn't as perfectly coiffed. As she straightens up, our eyes meet for a brief second across the expanse of lawn. There's no anger in her gaze, just a kind of weary resignation. I give a small, almost imperceptible nod. She looks away and continues her work. The war is over. My phone buzzes on the table. It's a text from Dave, the tech. We'd kept in touch, bonding over our shared trauma and a love for good network hardware. "You're not going to believe this. They just commissioned the new node they installed after the incident. Check the internal designation. Attached to the text is a screenshot. It's a clipped image from Megaband's internal network topology map. A series of nodes are listed with their technical designations. And there, shining like a beacon, is the new node servicing our neighborhood. Node ID, Alex01CKE, Alex01 Creekwood Estates. I let out a loud laugh, the sound carrying across the quiet morning air. I lean back in my chair and take another sip of my coffee. The internet is faster than it has ever been. The neighborhood is quiet. And somewhere, deep in the digital heart of the county, a small piece of the internet bears my name. All was right in the cul-de-sac. I was, and always would be, the reluctant, sarcastic, and extremely well-connected king of Creekwood Estates,